So, we've had a look at our Stone Age. So the Stone Age is split into three sections. There's the Paleolithic, the Neolithic and the Mesolithic. So that's the early, the middle and the late. The Meso is the middle, the Neo is the new, the Paleo is the early Stone Age. So we kind of call our ages by the technology that was around at the time. So we have the Stone Age. After we went through the Stone Age, we as a civilization moved into something called the Bronze Age. Now the reason we can move from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age is because of our mastery of fire. So in the Stone Age we were using fire for fairly basic things like cooking. We could fire harden wood, so that's a process where you kind of scorch the wood and you make the tip of a spear much harder by doing a process of forcing the resin out of the wood and almost making it like a glaze on the tip of the wood. So we were using it both for cooking, but we use it as a technology to create better tools for ourselves. Now, if you move into the Bronze Age, we were able to create fires that were hot enough to melt metals. So bronze is a mix of lead and tin, and it's called an alloy. So we got to the point where we mastered fire enough that we could melt these two metals and create bronze. And that's why we called it the Bronze Age, because we were using fire to better our tools and create a better sense of civilization and technology. Now after the Bronze Age we moved into the Iron Age, and that only came about again because we had a better mastery of fire. We could get hotter fires, we could burn them better, and we were able to create iron by extracting it out of different ores, so different rocks out of the ground. We heated them up until the rock crumbled away and we were left with iron, and then you can beat the iron into all sorts of things, whether they're pans or knives or whatever else. So it was only by getting better and better fires that we moved into different technological ages. So I've shown you a little bit with the Stone Age with the bow drill. We're going to go back to the Bronze Age maybe a little later. I'll show you something around that, around fire if we get the opportunity, but we'll move into the Iron Age. So with the Iron Age we've got something called flint and steel. So flint is a kind of rock. It's very hard, and if you break it in just the right way you can get very sharp edges. So back again in the Stone Age people were using these kind of edges. They're using a method called knapping, which where you cut it and you get a very specific shape. So they use these to make arrowheads, they use them to make skinning knives to scrape the fat off of animal hides before they turn them into tents or shoes or clothes. And if you cut the stone in just the right way, you get a very hard, very sharp edge. And if you work your iron into a specific shape like this, so this is a piece of steel. So steel is when you have carbon and iron together. So the same way that bronze is a mix of tin and lead, this is a mix of iron and carbon, and it gets you steel. So if we strike the two together at just the right angle, you can hopefully see we can get some sparks off of it. Now normally I ask people where they think the sparks are coming from, whether they think it's coming from the flint or the steel, but for this occasion I'm going to tell you guys. So what we're doing is we're getting the sparks from our steel. So this flint is so hard and so sharp we cut tiny little flecks of the steel off of this shape, and those tiny little flecks of steel react with the oxygen in the atmosphere very quickly, and that's what gives you the spark. So the same chemistry that gives you the spark is the same chemistry that if I left this in a bucket of water it would start to rust, but because the rust is on a big piece but the spark is from a tiny little piece that we cut, so it's about the surface area that we expose to the oxygen. So as I strike on there, each one of those little sparks is a tiny little bit of iron that's being cut off of this. Now if I get these little sparks I'm not really going to be able to get a fire off of it. It's very hard. So what I need to do is combine this to be able to get an ember. So the ember that you saw before in the Stone Age, we were using the wood and we were grinding it under pressure and friction to create an ember. Now what I'm going to do here is use something called charcloth. So I don't know how many of you guys have heard of charcloth, but I expect most of you have heard of charcoal. So charcoal is where you get some wood, you put it inside a container with no oxygen, no air, and you heat it, and it turns into a sort of a very light, very crumbly black mass, and that's your charcoal. you do the same thing with char cloth. So this used to be just a t-shirt like I'm wearing. We'll put it into a tin like this with a small hole in it, put it over a fire, and lots of smoke comes out, and you're left with these tiny little, very, very light, very, very soft little bits of char cloth. Now the great thing about char cloth is if I strike it right, it'll hopefully catch one of those sparks and it'll turn into an ember. So there we go. Hopefully you can see that on the camera.
Yeah.
We've got a nice little red glow. So that little red glow is our ember, and it will burn slowly through that little piece of char cloth. Now while that's burning, just like I could in the Stone Age, I could get myself some tinder, so really light bits, so some dry bulrushes, some crumpled up dry bits of ferns. If I want to do it in the 21st century, some little bits of cotton wool. Anything that's really light and fluffy and very dry will hopefully catch that, and that will be my tinder, and then I can move into my kindling, and then we can move into a fire. So you can see it's burning fairly slowly. I've got a bit of time to actually get there, and if I need to, I can get some more. Now another thing that I can work with, as well as the char cloth, are these. So these are called Alfred's cakes, or King Alfred cakes. They're a kind of fungus or mushroom, and hopefully you can see these little lines in there. So if you get these at just the right stage of their growth, they're quite dry and they're quite fibrous, and we can get an ember to catch on these. So if I get a couple bits of more of my char cloth, and let's see if we can strike another ember on these little bits of char cloth.
That's a lot faster, isn't it, than the bow drill?
Yeah, so technology is always going to make life a little bit easier. So depending on where you are in the world, the Iron Age starts around about 500 AD. Whether you're in sort of the classical civilizations of Greece and the Mediterranean, whether you're looking over into the Far East and China and some of the technology they were using, it's debatable exactly when it started in which region of the world. But the movement of technology generally does make life a little bit easier. Oh, now the wind is catching. I'm not quite getting my ember, my sparks rather, to catch onto my ember. Let's just try this little bit there again. Now you get sort of people who talk about cave people, there we go, striking rocks together. And what they were doing is not striking these pieces of flint together, but striking a kind of rock called pyrite. So pyrite is a kind of rock which has a lot of iron in it. So it's a mineral. And what you're trying to do is, just like I'm doing with my steel and my flint, is strike them together. But with the pyrite you need to get it, there we go, exactly in the right spot, so that the bits of iron in the rock strike the other bits of iron, or the hard bits of the other rock. So it's doable, but it's very hard. So what you can hopefully see now in my Alfred cake is I got a little spark in there, and that will ember and burn away quite nicely. Now this form of smouldering, not exactly this fungus, but a similar sort of thing, is still used by people today. So there's a kind of people called the Hadza people, and they live a traditional hunter-gathering lifestyle. And instead of lighting a fire every time they stop, or every evening, what they do instead is each morning they will get some of the hot embers from their fire and they will put them in a net bag. And just like this, where you've not got an absolute fire going, but they can swing that bag around occasionally, and they keep the embers going, they keep them burning all through the day, so that when they stop in the afternoon with their hunting kill, or when they stop in the evening and they want the fire for the night, they can just get the ember, put it down amongst the firewood, put it down amongst the material that's going to burn nicely, give it some more oxygen, like I'm doing, and blow the fire back to life again. So although we're saying that technology makes life a little easier and makes lighting your fire a little bit more simple, you still have the very, very functional traditional lifestyles where without the technology you can still make lighting a fire very easy because you simply don't ever let it go out.
Yeah.
So that's our Stone Age, that's a little bit into the Iron Age. We'll see how we move on from there and show you another technique in a moment.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack.